Hello, everybody. It is the fourth Saturday of the month, which means it's time for our Learn Pro Poker study group here at Rec Poker. So if you don't know what's up, every year with our every month in our Learning with Partners program, we get a chance to share a premium training video from other training sites catalogs. So a lot of great training sites around the world share their material with Rec Poker and our premium members. And Learn Pro Poker was actually our very first learning partner. We've had a great relationship with them and with Ryan Laplante over the years. So every month, we actually get a 1 hour length premium training video direct from Learn Pro Poker. And we get to share it with our members and sort of work on it throughout the month. And then I host the study group at the end of the month just to kind of review the material and see if we've got any questions from the group. Or some direction to Andrew Feist, who helps select these videos every month. And they have a lot of great videos at Learn Pro Poker. So this month we were looking at Endgame Part 2, which is a final table coaching session where Ryan LaPlante is reviewing the play of one of the LPP members as they get into the final two tables and then the final table of what I think is a $5 or $6 tournament on America's Card Room. So, Rob, Joe, have either of you guys had a chance to watch the video? It's okay if you haven't. I'm just curious to see.
I've watched part
I
of
have
it.
not.
Okay. So Ryan does a lot of these where he has basically taken the poker tracker hands from his client or his student, and he's running them through his own poker tracker replayer at just screen sharing and going through. Ryan uses a really simple HUD. It's mostly focused on pre-flop, which I think most, unless you're getting a lot of hands on people, you're not going to get a lot of information about post-flop stats and frequencies. So it makes sense to focus on the pre-flop stuff and some of the flop stuff that aggregates pretty quickly. And he sort of talks about weighing the different factors between ICM pressure that we're all feeling, applying ICM pressure to other players, who is savvy enough to even know what ICM pressure is and who is not, because ICM is one of those weird things where if your opponent makes ICM mistakes through ignorance, it can hurt you as much as it hurts them, which is kind of an odd thing. Usually we want our opponents to make mistakes in a lot of the games we play, and even in poker we really want our opponent to make mistakes because usually they're the ones that get hurt. But ICM is this weird leveling war where you need to know what assumptions your opponents are making, because if they call wider than they should against you, you're going to get into a showdown situation more often than you expect, which means that you probably shouldn't be shoving with some of the hands that an ICM bot would tell you to shove with, because when you've got ace-4 offsuit, you're blocking a lot of the combos that they can call with, and they really have to fold ace-5, ace-6, ace-7, ace-8. But if they're the kind of player that looks down at ace-7's like, oh, I got an ace, I better call here, then you don't want to be the one shoving ace-4 offsuit into that player. So it's a tricky, you really have to size up the people at the table. Here, hold on one second. I'm just going to close my door. Because, like I say, sort of poker is a game of letting your opponents make the mistakes that you want them to make. But sometimes with ICM, they can make mistakes that you don't want them to make. So the one thing that I always come away with from these videos is how important stack size is. And it's really the most important stat. It feels like player tendencies are important, positions important. And of course your card strength is important, but the stack size is really what matters more than anything. And it really impacts the hands that you choose to open with, the hands that you choose to 3-bet with, the hands that you choose to shove with. the hands that you choose to cold call with extremely stack dependent. And of course, ICM also affects how you play post flop. And Rob, you've talked about this a lot before, how when you're in situations like this, our actions kind of get demoted. So raises become calls, big bets become small bets become checks, calls become folds, that kind of thing. And you can see this playing out in the way that Ryan's breaking these hands down. So one thing that I wanted to discuss with the group today, I have this problem. Maybe it's not a problem. I have this approach to spots like this where, let's say an opponent is opening wide and I think they're a good target for a light 3-bet. We've talked about this in some other Wrecking Crew study groups before. People will say, like, okay, so you're going to 3-bet for value with the hands that you would normally 3-bet for value with. And then there's other hands that you might choose to 3-bet semi-bluff with, like suited aces or suited kings or, some offsuit aces. But that you have to just do that to a certain frequency. And if you're doing that like all the time with every combo of these hands, then you're 3-betting too much and your opponent can take advantage of that. I totally get that. And if we were playing like a million hands in this spot against these opponents, then that makes perfect sense to me. But intuitively, I feel like I'm more of the kind of player that Andrew Brokus describes when he says, if they move an inch, we move a mile in spots like this. If they're opening too wide, the appropriate response isn't to 3-bet slightly more, is to just to 3-bet the crap out of that player and to like go do it way more. And I can't, I constantly struggle with this in real time because I'm like, okay, so the GTO book says I should be 3-betting ace 4 suited and ace 5 suited. But I've got ace 3 suited. And like ace 3 suited has a lot of the same characteristics that ace 4 and ace 5 have that make it good for light 3-betting. It's got a blocker, it's suited, it can make the nut flush, it can make the wheel straight. And I'm not going to get dealt ace 4 and ace 5 at the frequency that would be demanded by the law of averages. But here I've got this other hand that's pretty close to it. I find myself just taking those 3-bet spots. And I think, I don't know, I want to talk to you guys about kind of like how you feel about this, because Ryan is very solver approved. Like he knows all the combos he's supposed to use. He knows the frequencies that he's supposed to use. But when he talks about it here, he's like, there's an ace 4 offsuit hand. There's a queen jack offsuit hand where someone opens in front and Ryan's like, oh, well, this is a spot you should be taking against this opponent. And he talks about like, if you have an opponent who's opening loose or overfolding to 3-bets, like you really want to expand your range. And when you're expanding it to hands like ace 4 offsuit, like queen jack offsuit, I think you really are taking this kind of mindset that, is this hand a good candidate for a 3-bet? And if so, I mean, I guess you could randomize. Right? You could say like, I'm only going to do this half the time. I'm going to go look up at the clock. And if the second hand's between 0 and 30, I'm not going to do it. But if it's between 30 and 60, then I'm going to do it. Or something like that. I don't know. Rob, what do you think about this?
It doesn't seem like he's randomizing.
He is not. He's definitely not.
He's just taking spots.
Right.
It really is not as much to do with the hand as it is, like you say, the opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Ginger's coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get that one?
I did. Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's taken spots more than he's with a, you know, with a specific range, with a specific GTO range. He's not really looking at a specific GTO range to try to stay balanced.
Hmm.
He's looking at the type of hand it is and putting pressure on the other people to make them make a mistake.
Right. Right. Hey, Ginger, welcome to the study group. We're just talking about a recent video from Learn Pro Poker where Ryan Laplante is reviewing a final table play from one of his students, hand by hand. And one of the themes that came up in the video was to just take take good spots. You know, even if you don't necessarily have the perfect hand for it, to apply pressure. And the conversation that we're having right now is sort of how selective do we how important is it that we balance our range in these spots? How important is it that we're only three bet bluffing at a frequency that's appropriate for the amount of value three bets that we're making? um and obviously we don't want to be so unbalanced that we're like only ever bluffing with our three bets. But again, like in a situation like this, how many hands are we going to play against these players? 40, 50, 60 maybe in this final table? What are they going to do? Four bet wider back at us? That takes guts. Ginger, what's on your mind about that?
No, I was just going to say thank you for the little update because I'm late getting in here, but I appreciate you letting me know where we're at.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. Um, and Ginger, I'll just ask you this because I already asked Rob and Joe. Um, when you're playing in relatively low stakes games against relatively unknown opponents, you know, how much do you prioritize balance when it comes to, you know, being unexploitable, and how much are you really prioritizing just kind of like playing the hand in front of you or your image?
We've done a lot of GTO work, so I feel like I'm pretty balanced. I like taking spots with like King 5 offsuit and King 6 offsuit from the big blind to raise because it's an easy fold, you know?
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And I like that way of thinking about it too, where it's like uh, I think about it as sort of these are the candidates that I would choose to three bet bluff with, and they're going to be like ace X hands, king X hands, and then it's just a question of like a spectrum, I guess, of very very good candidates like ace five suited, and then like less good candidates like, you know, king four offsuit or something like that, which still has some blocker power and still has some high card value, um, but isn't as playable and, you know, can't make as strong a hand post flop. But
One of the
against certain,
things I do
yeah,
like
please,
to do
yeah,
is to make sure that when I'm three betting, I already know what I'm going to do if I'm four bet or, you know,
yes.
that's I like to have a plan.
So you have like so some hands, for instance, you're like, okay, if they don't fold, I'm just never putting a penny in post flop unless I like hit two pair plus or something. Like with king four, for instance, offsuit. Uh,
Right.
right. And I think it's, yeah, it sounds simple, but I think a lot of players would really benefit from this idea of having a plan. Um, in fact, one of the first ever podcast episodes I joined, I think Rob Adsum submitted a hand where he had three bet squeezed from the button with ace five suited, and the board came up in such a way that it wasn't the kind of board that he wanted, but he still felt responsible for continuing his story post flop. So he ended up kind of getting into some trouble post flop because he didn't really have a plan for how to proceed with that three bet. So I like that a lot. Clecius, we're welcome to the show. We're just talking about a video from Ryan Laplante talking about a coaching review where he took one of his students' final table play and broke it down in one of his study groups. So we're actually just right now talking about the importance of balance and whether it's a problem if we take too many semi-bluff spots, specifically with 3 bets pre-flop. So yeah, I like Ginger's point about having a plan with it, which is why hands like ace-5 suited are so good for these 3-bet semi-bluffs, because they have a lot of ways to improve. They have a lot of draws. And what you're mostly looking for in spots like this is you're looking for opportunities to continue post-flop. So if you have an opponent that calls 3-bets too wide, but folds on a lot of flops and turns, like that's actually a great opponent to have. You should be 3-betting them a lot with hands that you can then take it away post flop. Like we think about 3-bet semi bluffs as, does this player overfold to 3-bets a lot? If so, we should be 3-betting them more, and that's true. But just because they call 3-bets does not mean that we shouldn't be targeting them with light 3-bets, because then you get into post flop situations where it's like, okay, I'm in position, I've got range advantage because I 3-bet pre-flop and they called. It's hard to hit a flop, so most of the time they're not going to have the kind of hand that can withstand, a couple streets of betting. And now you've won a much bigger pot than if they had just folded pre-flop and you pick up, their 2.5 big blind open or whatever it was. So let me ask you this, guys. And Rob, I'm curious your take on this in particular. Let's say someone at your table is 3-betting more than you think they should. What are you actually going to do about that? How are you going to combat that as a player?
I think and I've had this situation come up actually. So, the one thing I do is probably tighten up a little bit on my pre-flop ranges, so that I have a hand I'm comfortable 4-betting. Because now we're getting into that next level where, they don't have that really strong 3-betting range anymore. They're 3-betting the ace-4 offsuit, right? So now if I have a suited ace-jack, that could be a hand that I could 4-bet him with, because I'm ahead of a lot of the 3-bet bluffs that he has.
Mm-hmm.
And I can, as soon as I do that, he's going to go, oh, shit. And he's going to be folding, because if he's 3-betting that much, he's not, he's 3-betting that much. He's not 3-betting with extreme value anymore.
Yeah. And I think people underestimate just how few very strong hands there are. And, like if you look at the charts, it's like, okay, aces and kings, those are very strong hands. Queens are very strong. Ace, king, very strong hand. And then it's just kind of like, then there's this huge chunk of like, yeah, those are pretty good hands. Tens, jacks, ace, queen, ace, jack suited. But they're not like, oh, I can't wait to get it in against a 4-bet. There's just not that many hands that players really wanted to get it in against a 4-bet. And so the wider their 3-bet range is, the smaller the proportion of those hands that are willing to get it in. It's just I joke about like math often, but that's actually math. Like you can't argue with that. So if there is someone who's 3-betting too much, Rob kind of brings up the two canonical responses to that. So you tighten up your opening range, because you want to be able, you don't want to be folding to 3-bets as often. So you need a stronger range of hands. And then also 4-betting more. But 4-betting is scary. Players don't feel comfortable 4-betting. But it's the only way to make these aggressive 3-betters less comfortable. For God's sake, don't punish them. Don't punish them by like calling lighter and like trying to trap them post flop and like making hands. Making hands is hard, and like it does not happen very frequently. So if someone's three betting you a lot, the solution is not, oh, I'm not going to fold this time. I'm just going to hit a 7 on the flop and make your life miserable. You're actually just playing their game. You're just, like I described at the beginning. Now you're just playing bigger pots where your range is capped and theirs isn't. And those are hard to play post flop. So, and folding, you know, it doesn't punish them, even though it's probably like, you know, the best decision for you in a lot of these spots. Facing a three bet is a lot like playing from the blinds. It's an inherently non-profitable situation. If you look at the best players in the world, when they're playing from the blinds, they're still losing chips. Playing from the big blind, you know, if you fold every hand, you'd be minus 100 big blinds per 100. From the small blind, you'd be minus 50 big blinds per 100. So the best players in the world, they just chip away at that debt, at that loss. And, you know, some are there are some excellent players playing in the right games that are profitable from the blinds, but almost every player is a losing player from the blinds. Being out of position and having to put chips in with 100% of your card range, it's just not a profitable scenario. Neither is facing three bets. So it's okay to be a losing player when you're facing three bets. The real question is, how do we become less of a losing player? How do we chip away at that loss, at that EV debt that's created? So folding kind of caps our losses, but we can't win any either. Calling, like we've talked about, especially if you're out of position, you're just playing bigger pots out of position without range advantage. You have to make hands, or you know, there might be boards that run out very, very well for your range and not for your opponent's range, but they're in the minority. Most boards aren't like that. So the only way to fight back is by four betting, and these are the only hands that are actually value four bets. So you, how often, like, what are we going to four bet with? Are we going to four bet with like the ace 5 suited, the king 5 suited? Are we going to four bet with like ace jack suited, ace jack offsuit, you know, pocket nines? Like these are pretty good hands. And you got to think about your opponent too, right? Like, is this an opponent that three bets with a polarized range? Is this an opponent that three bets with a linear range? Do we want to put them in a position where they can play perfectly against us? It's kind of tempting to take the same approach that we take as a three better against wide opening ranges, which is we take a bunch of combos of ace X and king X, blocker hands, high card hands, and turn those into three bets. But what they really rely on is having a lot of fold equity because your opening range has a lot of garbage in it. When you're looking to four bet against an opponent who three bets too widely, it's true that they have some non-premiums in that three betting range, but they don't have as much garbage in a polarized three betting range as they do in a wide opening range. So we don't need as many combos of four bet bluffs in order to apply sort of the same kind of proportional pressure to their range. So do we ever really need four bet bluffs? Like really only if the players are three betting too widely, which is the spot that we're kind of talking about here. Joe and Rob, you guys are on camera here, so I'm going to call on you. How often do you four bet bluff? And like, how do you, if you do, and like, how do you choose what hands to use for it? Joe, you unmuted. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I've been playing that long, as you know, I'm kind of a newbie, and so I haven't even developed a strategy for that. But I don't know if it kind of ever even four bet.
Right.
Yeah, so that's It's interesting what you guys are saying about if facing three bet is as profitable, I guess, statistically as the blinds. I never thought about it like that. Like you're at a disadvantage inherently.
Yes.
That's interesting.
No, you
Yeah.
definitely are. And like Matt Matros, Rob, you remember in the game plan, I think he said basically just like don't have a 4-bet range because
Right.
you're better off just calling with all the hands that you would 4-bet with and not having to be in that position. But in reality, Rob, do you 4-bet bluff at all?
Probably not. I mean, a lot has to do with the player pools I'm playing against, obviously, because people in the player pools that I'm playing against, I'm playing small stakes tournaments and small stakes cash. Those players are not over 3-betting. So I found out after looking at my poker tracker stats that I was calling 3-bets too much.
Mm-hmm.
I was losing money when I was calling 3-bets. So basically, depending on, the hand I have, obviously. I mean, if I open aces and somebody 3-bets me, well, I'm obviously 4-betting them, right? I want to get the money in. Let's go. But if a normal opening range is going to have a lot of hands that are going to be folding to a 3-bet. And so I have to learn to do that. I can't get married to, that suited, Jack 10, that I just got 3-bet and I'm out of position. Well, I'm going to find myself in some very troubling waters once the flop hits. So it's not even worth it to continue. So yeah, I think again, it has a lot to do with the player pool. Now, I was in a situation in a live game, live tournament where there was some kid that was 3-betting me liberally. So what I did is I tightened up a little bit on my opening range, and then I was able to call him in position because he was doing it from the blinds. So I was opening late, like cutoff button. He was in the small blind or big blind, and he was 3-betting me quite liberally. So I was choosing a little stronger hands, and then I would 4-bet or call because I knew that his range was much wider than it should be because there's no way that frequency made sense at all. So
Yeah. And being in position makes a big difference too, I think. Especially because we're playing, we're inherently we're playing bigger pots now when they're 3-bet pots pre-flop.
Right.
Welcome, Scott. We're just talking about the Learn Pro Poker video that was released this month to Rec Poker Premium members. It's all about Ryan Laplante doing a coaching session with one of his clients by reviewing their final table play. And so
Okay, cool.
Sparked a conversation here in the group about ICM pressure and applying pressure and 3-betting and what makes good candidates for 3-betting. And the thing that we're really interested in now is sort of how do you combat against players that are 3-betting too frequently. And the consensus here among the group seems to be that tightening up your opening range makes sense. So you've got fewer hands that you have to fold to 3-bets.
Yes.
And now we're looking at sort of that, which is more of a defensive adjustment. And now we're looking at the offensive adjustment of 4-betting more. And how uncomfortable that is, especially for recreational players.
Right.
And like, and then what? Right? Like, it's one thing to say, oh, I'm just going to 4-bet more, but like, what if they call and now you have to play post flop? What if they jam and you chose the kind of hand that actually wanted to see a flop and now you're unsure, about how to proceed? Like Ginger had a great point earlier, which is just like know how you're going to respond, have a plan when 3-betting and 4-betting. so that you can kind of like anticipate some of the common events that'll come next. What if they shove?
Yeah.
You know, let's
Especially
have
like
thought
in-
about that.
Yeah, especially like in chess, you always need to think like 2, 3, sometimes even 4 moves ahead, depending on the situation.
Yeah, yeah. And you can also sort of think out a little bit like, okay, so what happens if they call and the board comes, 3 diamonds? Or what if they call on the board? You can kind of think ahead a little bit when it comes to like certain board textures or something like that, so that you kind of know how you're planning to respond. Not that you have to have it all figured out in advance, but like,
Oh, right. Yeah, no.
but you do want to sort of have a plan, like Ginger was saying. And some of your 3-betting or 4-betting semi bluffs, the plan is just going to be, oh, they didn't fold, I give up. Like it was a profitable 3-bet bluff. It didn't work because they were high enough in their distribution. It was still a good bluff spot, but it was not part of the plan to just keep firing on future streets with this hand unless you pick up a lot of equity.
Right.
So I'll ask you, Scott, just because you joined as we were kind of in the middle of this conversation, and ditto for you, Cletius, if you're, I know you're not at your desk right now, but if you feel like unmuting and chipping in, I'd love to hear from you as well. Scott, what, like, in the games that you're playing, do you 4-bet bluff very frequently?
Not very frequently at all. Sometimes in tournaments, I'll do the occasional. But for the most part, for especially like live cash games, nobody 4-bets unless they have it.
Right.
Nobody does.
And nobody 3-bets unless they have it, really.
Right.
Correct. Yeah. I do occasionally, but I'll have a hand that works well post flop. Obviously depending on what they have. But generally speaking, like say for example, Jack 10 suited.
Right.
And they'll be like in mid position and I'll 3-bet with it. And if they 4-bet, I'll be like, okay, well, this kind of works a little bit. But it depends on the person and the situation and the dynamics of the table that you have.
Yeah, definitely. And we're also, like we're talking about, position matters a lot here. Yeah, Cletius, jump in.
Yeah, so I play on ACR a lot. So once the regs on ACR see that you start folding the 3-bets, they start 3-betting you quite a bit. So
yeah.
I pay attention on my HUD a lot of their 3-bet percentages, and then I really pay attention to those players when I get to showdown. If I could see what they're 3-betting with, like if they're 3-betting with the Jack 10 off or the 8-7 off, then I know I can 4-bet bluff a little more freely than if a guy's just raising me with Ace King suited. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
yeah,
that's what I take in place.
Yep, I think that's good advice. And of course, it's a great point that Cletius brings up here. Sometimes players just get on a heater. Sometimes they're just 3-betting you a lot because they've got aces, kings, and queens, and ace king and ace queen. Like it's just a hot couple orbits for them. And so getting to showdown, seeing them actually turn over cards makes a big difference. There's a big difference between frequency and composition. Being able to actually see, and that's why, I encourage folks, don't just show your hand all the time. Don't get into a habit of just like, oh, you got me, like show your hand and muck it. It's okay every once in a while if it's good for the table. But for the most part, what you want to avoid giving up is the extension of your range. So like if you 3-bet and everyone folds, show the aces, because everyone expects you to 3-bet with aces. Throw the kings, show the kings. But don't show the ace-5 suited, don't show the Jack 9 suited, because that kind of it gives people information about the extent of your range. Just like if you're folding, if it like folds to the small blind and they shove and you're in the big blind and you're folding, show the 2-7, show the 3-4, but don't show the like king 7 suited that you folded, because like you just don't want them to know like where is the cusp hand for this player, because then they can start playing real math poker against you and being like, okay, well they're actually folding a huge portion of their range here. I should be attacking this more frequently. Ginger, you unmuted.
So interestingly, I had a hand yesterday where the small blind, you know, actually the button opened. I had king nine suited and I
Mhm.
three bet that, and the big blind folded, and the button showed an ace and folded.
Right.
And I felt so good.
Yeah. Yeah, good for you. I remember when I was in Dublin this spring playing in the Irish Poker Open, I was three betting a lot. And a few players would routinely show me an ace. They would just like flip over one ace and then muck their cards. And I was like, oh, please keep showing me that you're opening
Well,
ace X hands and then folding to three bets. Yeah, Ginger.
that's a good thing for why we don't show our hands.
Yes.
Because oh my gosh, that made me feel so good that they laid down an ace right there.
Right. Yeah. Um, and it kind of does put a target on them now, because you're thinking, okay, well, if they're folding ace X to a three bet, then they're folding king jack, they're folding all their suited connectors. They're really only calling with like pocket pairs and strong aces, and I don't know, maybe some suited Broadway or something like that. But it tells you a lot about that player if they're folding ace X hands to a three bet. And we should all be folding some ace X hands to a three bet, but we don't need to like confirm that to everybody. Yeah, because it really just, as you say, when you can be more specific about where people's cutoffs are, then you can make more than just feel decisions on how to play against them. Uh, yeah, and then I guess I'm curious where the rest of you sit on this issue when it comes to showing first, because I mean, some people really get tied up into whose action it was, like who's supposed to show first, and we'll get into these kind of like staring wars where 30 seconds go by and both players just have their cards in their hand and they won't open their hand.
Well,
I mean, I don't know. Maybe I show too often in spots like that because I just want to get the hand over with, and I'm like, oh, I had pocket eights. Like, were you bluffing or not? And then they just muck. Cletius, what's your take on that?
I'm the complete opposite. If I'm the guy that called the bet, I'm the guy that's staring at the guy waiting for him to show his cards, because I want to see his cards.
Yes.
And then if I don't have the hand, I don't want him to see that I didn't have what hand I had. So in both directions, I'm that guy that just stares at him. I called you. So
Yeah. And I think you've paid for them to turn their card over. Like when they're the one that should turn over first. It kind of bugs me a little when they like start this sort of like pressure war, because it's like, I called you, buddy, turn your card, like open your hand, like this is how it's supposed to work. So yeah, I think it's actually a bit of a leak for me that I just sort of decide that like, oh, how valuable could it be? But I think you're absolutely right, Cletius. Like players that pay attention are going to know something. If they every time you go to showdown, you're giving something away. You can go back all the way through the hand and be like, oh, that's the kind of hand that they call pre-flop raises with and don't three bet. Pocket eights is a call for them. That helps. That helps them in their range construction. Sorry, Cletius, I thought you unmuted earlier there. Do you have anything else?
yeah, I was just saying it could change your tag in their mind. You could go from
Right.
that rec player that all of a sudden, oh, he's capable now. So
Right.
as long as I can keep as the rec tag, I want to keep the rec tag.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I love that for sure. Because poker is all about frustrating your opponent's assumptions, right? If they can make poor assumptions about you, then but more power to you to be able to subvert that. So is there a is there a strategy or a tactic at that point that folks here in the group have found helpful, as opposed to just like the stare, just like the waiting, and everyone else at the table is like, let's get another hand in, guys. You know, I just don't like to be rude about it, but sometimes I am like, just like, show your hand now, you know. And even sometimes after that, even they'll be like, well, what'd you have? Did you have it? I'm like, open your hand, sir. um has anyone experienced any success or frustration in that? Are there certain players that just like they're only going to respond if like the dealer or someone at the table gets rude about it?
Yeah, I actually had it yesterday when I was playing live over at TCH Social.
Oh yeah.
I had called the guy's hand, and he's like, "You're good."
Right.
I'm like, "Okay, you're bluffing, but I still called your hand. I want to see it." He's like, "Well, I don't have to show it." I'm like, "Sir, I did call your bet." And I look at the dealer, and he's like, "You have to show."
Yeah.
He showed, and I don't even know why he was in the hand in the beginning with the hand that he had. He had like 5-4 offsuit or something like that. But usually when that happens, if I'm the caller and they take like 10, 15 seconds, I'm like, dude, I called you.
Yeah.
That's usually all it takes.
And I think that kind of strategy is best for a lot of problems that come up like etiquette wise in poker at the table, which like poker has rules to solve a lot of this stuff. Most of it we've kind of figured out the smoothest path to just resolving it and moving on. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And you kind of do notice like, are there particular players that you need to have a heavier hand with over the course of a session? Cliches, what's on your mind with that?
And also by doing that, you can find situations where you're bluffing and you don't want to show your hand, but you say, I called you. And with that ace high thinking this guy could be bluffing. And then when you say, I called you, and he just mucks the cards, that's the greatest feeling in the world when you're the bluffer. So.
Yes, exactly. And that's the other thing I was going to mention as well. Like sometimes, like when they say, "Oh, you're good," and Joe, this is for you in particular because we were kind of talking about this last time we were hanging out. People will angle you there. Like they'll say, "Oh, you're good," and wait for you to muck your hand, and then just like table their hand, and now they're the only player left in the hand, and they get awarded the pot. Like you really have to protect yourself and your hand, and be like, when they say you're good, you're saying, is that a fold? Right? Like, you know, you're not releasing your cards until the pot is being pushed towards you.
I was just gonna say that. I never release my cards until the dealer's pushing the pot my way.
Yeah.
Sometimes I forget and they have to tell me, hey, can I have those cards?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But the worst thing you can do is muck early or flip over early, you know, like I've flipped over thinking that action was done, but there was one other person still in the hand on the other side of the table there. And oh God, that's such a stupid feeling. Yeah.
I thought you said that I thought it was a rule that the aggressor had to show their cards. I thought that was like the general rule. Like
there's a general rule. There's a general rule that the player who took the last aggressive action has to show down first. And I'd love some clarification from the folks in the chat if I'm not nailing the actual rule here. But there's a general rule in a lot of jurisdictions that the player who made the last aggressive action has to show. Cletus, is that your understanding?
Yeah, didn't they have this actually happened? It kind of went viral on Twitter in the WSOP where the guy had the winning hand and the other dude said, you're good. And he mucked his hands. And then the guy flipped his cards over and said, I'm the only one with cards.
Yeah.
And they actually awarded that guy hit the pot. So,
yeah. Because you are responsible for.
Yeah. And once your hands hit the mucks, they won't dig out your hand out of the muck. So,
yeah. And there are edge cases, like if you muck it, but it's very clear which two cards they are. Like if you throw it towards the middle, but they're not mixed in with the muck pile, then legally speaking, the dealer can pull them out and they will still play. But if they're
There's no reason to ever get into that situation.
exactly,
That
Exactly.
is a mistake that you made.
yes,
And if you make that mistake, shame on you.
yeah, and you will. We all have, and like feel
Yeah.
the shame because that's the only way that we kind of like learn not to do it again. Ginger, what's on your mind?
I appreciate this little conversation because I'm getting ready to play live in Cherokee. And
Right.
I'm going to keep my hands on my cards. I'm going to make sure that I pay close attention to what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that trips players up at all different experience levels and skill levels too, especially like if you're used to playing online. Some of the mechanics of live play are non-intuitive, or counterintuitive. But they have all these rules for a good reason. In the long run, it speeds the game up and it removes the kind of ambiguity that allows angle shooting and that kind of thing. If I'm playing cash, what I always do is I take whatever the lowest denomination chip at the table is. If it's 1-3 or 1-2, it's a $1 chip, and I use that as a card protector. And so when I'm playing cash, as soon as I get my 2 cards, I get a $1 chip on top of it. And when the hand is over, if I win, I slide that to the dealer, and there's their tip. They've got their tip. I've protected my hand. I've always got this little routine that's the exact same every time. And I never have to. And if it's a really big pot, then you add some money to the tip. But the point is that like you just slide your winning hand with the card with the chip on it. It's very simple and easy. It's hard to screw up. Do it the same way every time. If you're in a tournament, I like to use my Rec Poker shot glass as my card protector. And same kind of thing, just same routine. It just goes right on top as soon as I get my cards. And it just doesn't, I slide it to check my cards from time to time, but until the dealer starts sliding that pot towards me, I'm not releasing those cards. Is there? Yeah,
for me, I use my daughter's Yoda.
Nice.
I've had this Yoda for a very long time. And whatever I do is when I start the hand, I turn it facing the table. And at the end of the hand, if I'm the winner, I turn it facing me.
Mm.
And until the dealer pushes the pot towards me, my Yoda does not move from my cards.
Yep.
Once I get
like
the pot, boom, done.
Yeah. So having a process makes a big difference. Like having a standard protocol that you use every time just minimizes the opportunity to kind of just accidentally make a mistake mechanically. Ginger, was there something else there?
Nope, I just didn't mute because everybody has finally left my house.
Oh, good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So then there is some other house rule about who has to show first. Someone help me out here in the chat. Is this like,
I think what you're talking about is if it just checks down.
yeah,
If a hand checks all the way down, then the first person that would normally act would be the first person to show,
Right.
and it goes around the table. But if there's a bet on the river and somebody calls, the bettor is the person who shows first.
and Rob, is that simply on the river? If it goes check, then the player first to act has to reveal their okay, so it doesn't go back to previous. If someone made a bet on the turn, they would be the previous aggressor. Okay.
No, as long as everybody had a chance to be an aggressor and nobody took that chance on the river, then it just goes around the table.
Okay.
And even though most of the time they both, when it goes check on the river, they usually just both flip over at the same time anyways, at least the games that I've had.
Yeah.
There's a link in chat for the automatic showdown rules.
Oh, all right. Fantastic. In our chat here in Zoom, I don't see it. Did you hit enter? I don't know if it didn't.
Yeah, I hit enter. Let's see. To
That's
everyone. How about that?
Yeah, there we
you
go.
go.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, great. And this is exactly the kind of thing where it's like there is a rule for this. It's just a question of does everyone know the rule?
It's
Are
there.
people
Oh, sorry.
no, please.
Well, so I was involved in a cash game. This is probably 5, 6 months ago at the local VFW here, and there was a guy he was being rude, not necessarily me, but with not showing his hand, it's showdown or whatever. And the dealer at one point just got to the point where he said, "Just show me the winner." And so what the dealer explained to me after the guy left, explained, I said, those rules are there for the dealer to be able to enforce with someone when there's dispute between players. So that's part of the reason they're there. They're not like you're saying, they're general rule. When it comes down to it, if there's a dispute, dealer can say, no, you have to show right now. That's been my explanation from that particular dealer.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's
Yeah.
just valuable so that the dealer has a rule to like tap on the wall and say like, no, like just follow the rules, gang. Like,
Yeah.
which is why, yeah, like there are a lot of rules. Poker has a lot of like weird,
Yeah.
obscure rules, but they're usually there for a good reason. They're there because
Right.
like someone tried to push an angle one time, and so they had
Yeah.
to make a rule about it. And even though it
Yeah.
doesn't come up very often, it's important to have the rule.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a good. We're getting kind of close to the end of the hour here, but I think we had a really good conversation. I still want to get to the bottom of this. How do you combat against players that are 3-betting more frequently? Because I'm one of those players, and like it's like a superpower because the only way to really combat it is to 4-bet lighter, and that's not something most people are willing to do. So maybe I don't know, next month if we haven't. I think Andrew's picked another final table video for Ryan, so we'll see if we get into any of this 3-bet 4-bet dynamic. But or maybe this is something we can look at in my monthly poker tracker for review group, where we can filter down into some facing 3-bet spots.
Yeah, there are stats on Poker Track PT4 that do specifically get that.
That's exactly the kind of thing that Poker Tracker is good for, is filtering down for specific scenarios. And if you can see spots where you're facing a 3-bet, then that's going to help you analyze your opening range in those spots, the hands that you think your opponent is going to be 3-betting you with, the hands that you're going to call with, the hands that you're going to 4-bet with. So that's a good exercise. Maybe we'll look at that for August. Thank you, Ginger, for the excellent resource on who shows their cards first. That's like I say, just to remove that ambiguity is always helpful. Does anyone else want to ask anything else or offer any other points into this conversation? All right. Well, thanks to some 100K members for splashing around in the Rec Poker study groups. I hope to see a lot more of you over the next little while. July is actually kind of a very slow month for us. I think we had fewer study groups in July than any other month we've had this year, because of travel and the series and that kind of thing. But stick around for August. You're going to find we're a little more active and engaged when half of our wrecking crew isn't down in Las Vegas. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a good month. Cletus, Ginger, anything else from you before we roll on out of here?
One thing, it's Cletus.
Cletus. Okay, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. Drew always calls me Cletus too, but I just thought I'd set you straight from the beginning. I
appreciate it.
I met Drew in Vegas this summer, and I told him, "Hey man, you pronounce my name wrong," and he goes, I know I'm pronouncing your name wrong." He goes, "If you notice, I say it different every time." And I was like, "I did," but and he goes, "It's kind of a joke to myself now." So anyway. It's Cletus.
That's awesome. Oh, thanks,
because
Cletus.
we
I
all
appreciate
give
that.
Drew such a hard time about it.
Yeah. Well, you guys have a really fun group. I'm excited to get to know a lot of you better. And yeah, I'll stick to Cletus from now on. Thank you, my man. Right. Well, have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for joining in. Some great feedback today, and I'll see you next week here at Rec Poker. Enjoy the time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
All right. Bye.